Hello, and welcome to another episode of So Are We Doing Life podcast. And today we are doing our first segment of Friends in Real Life, where we talk to people that I am friends with in real life, that not just on social media. We just talk about a little bit of everything. And today we have my dear friend Brittany, who is an entrepreneur herself. She has her own IT business. She lives in Florida. And Brittany and I just kind of talk about things sometimes. And so today we want to talk about representation in media and how social media especially has changed that. We both grew up kind of in the 90s and in a time when, 90s, early 2000s, in a time when you didn't have a lot of LGBTQ, you didn't have a lot of BIPOC representation, you didn't have a lot of women in general. And when you did, it was very stereotypical type representation. So, Brittany, do you want to say anything about yourself before we get started?
No.
Oh, one more thing. Brittany's camera is not working today. We were having some technical issues, but we decided to just go ahead and move forward and record anyway. So you're not going to see Brittany's face today. Maybe you'll see her in a later episode. She'll definitely be back. But today we're just going to go with it. Okay. So Brittany, I just wanted you to kind of start and because what kind of made us prompt us to do this was when you were talking about how much it has changed and how we didn't see people who looked like us when we were younger, like in the beginning of social media or before social media, because we weren't able to. So I just want you to talk about that a little bit.
Oh my God. So you just bestowed upon me a memory that I had of the many times I've cried in Target. This particular time I cried in Target was was 2020. I think it was actually closer to 2021 after like the Black Lives Matter movement. And it was my first time going to a Target and seeing like walking into the doors and then they have like the Black History Month stuff in the front, just there because like my entire life it was never like a thing. They sung that weird song in school like for like maybe 2 years. And then after that, there was nothing that really happened. And then closer to like 2018, 2019, they started having things. But I tell you the how I felt just seeing that, it's actually being celebrated like Black History Month and having like them going to Black artists and then designers and seeing like that. It was to me it was moving, but again, it's a lot of people say it's probably just like, it's okay.
No,
But
no, I think I agree with you. Well, I definitely agree with you because I feel like I feel like it's a lot of exposure too, right? Like if you were going to be exposed, your family had to expose you. And I will say I kind of grew up in a family where there was a lot of exposure, and I think it's because it's going to sound crazy, but I really think it's because of the fact that we have a mixed background, right? So I grew up in a house with a Puerto Rican parent and a Black parent, and so they were
mhm.
really big on knowing all of our culture and not denying any of our culture and who we were and really being in touch with that. And so not only did my parents make sure that we knew about our all of our culture, they wanted to make sure we knew about culture in general and knew about things that we didn't learn in school. So the history that we learned at home was always much deeper than the history we learned in school. And so
Mhm.
I got to a place where the history to me in school wasn't really history because there was not representation. And I don't know who said it, but I don't know if you've ever heard the quote or however it goes is that, the winners are who writes the victors or something like that, write the history books. And I feel like that's the same about representation, especially like not now. Like social media has really changed it, but back when we were younger, when we were in high school, middle school, elementary school, we weren't who was we weren't the people who had the reach, and so therefore the history wasn't ours, like the representation wasn't ours. Does that make sense?
No, it does because I didn't know a lot about like anything I found out about Black history, I had to look up myself. Especially in school, it was like slavery was a maybe a chapter and it was like less than 2 pages. And so they kind of brushed it and they were just like, it happened, move on. So a lot of things that I learned I had to kind of dig up. So I love seeing it today that it's a topic that's being talked about and that people are actually upset that, isn't they're trying to kind of put it down again. But it's it's just really eye-opening and
Yeah, and it's so funny because like even looking at this shows like okay, I don't know if I'm allowed to say the name of shows or not, so I'm not going to say the name of this show, but there's a show that I watched that there was like literally one season. Um and it was basically like a year in the life of like it was like a teen it was kind of like that type of vibe because that's what we did back then. And so the main characters were a girl who lived in a two-family home where her family at the beginning were cool, like they were a white family, and it was like two family stable home, whatever. Her two best friends were a girl who her mom was a single mom busting her butt, she was also white, and then their other best friend was a Hispanic gay male who was kicked out of his house for being gay. And that, like, to me, that was the first time, like, really there was LGBTQ representation, like, that I could really clearly remember where it
Mhm.
wasn't stereotypical or in a negative light. Like, they were really talking about, like, real life, like, look at this guy who is this person who is an amazing person. And it's just funny because I feel like, we kind of touched a little bit here and there on it during that time, but I don't think that we really got representation across the board for like anything, BIPOC, LGBTQ, anything until like you have pockets of like little different things in different shows, um, where it was in a positive light until social media, where we were forced to see it. We're forced to see the reality that that everybody doesn't live these stereotypical lives. Does that make sense? Like, I guess it makes sense, but you know what I mean, right? Like, I think during our time, there was very
No, it
much
does.
go ahead.
Oh no, I was agreeing.
Oh, I was gonna say during our time, like, there weren't a lot of Claire Huxtables, if that makes sense. Like,
They were.
like that was such a big thing because she was such a positive person and she was a doctor and she was this woman. And I still remember in high school, like I come from a family, yes, where we have college degrees and things like that, but that's me just seeing my family and just thinking that it's normal within my family or seeing my friend's family and thinking that that's normal. But I still
Hmm.
remember in high school, I was on forensics team. And for people who don't know what forensics is in high school, it's kind of like speaking. You do different categories where you just have to do like different types of speech competitions. And our coach, who was the English teacher, his wife was going to school in a doctorate program for PsyD. And I was so just mesmerized because I could not believe that I saw in real life outside of my family this Black woman doing all of these things that I see, like that I rarely see. And it was so like she had such a big impact on me because I was like, look, it happens in real life, you know? But I feel like now it's kind of normal to see all of us being represented. But I feel like without social media, would we have gotten here this way?
That's crazy. I feel like my kind of like, oh my God, like seeing a person of color can do it wasn't exactly, she wasn't a black woman. I don't think her name's actually Snow, but my grandmother called her Snow. And I don't know what she was Asian and I don't know which one, so I'm not gonna say. But I remember when they became friends when she first moved to this country, and I was really young, and then seeing her, like kind of move up, and then she used to be like a worker in a nail shop, and then like watching her go from like working in a nail shop and not having much, and then like literally owning her own nail shop and opening stores, and then like watching her just kind of like move up in the world, like seeing that transition for someone of, even if though it's like not a black woman, that was just like you can be out here and doing that. Was my first, is just like that is amazing because like again it wasn't, and when we were younger you didn't really see anyone of color, like Asian, Black, Spanish, like nothing. It was just so like seeing that as a young person and just like watching her again ascend to like like a better quality of like watching like especially being like intimately seeing like her like moving from, like a better part of the neighborhood, the town to a better one. So for me, that was like really eye-opening and inspiring. So I'm just like, you did that. That was
I
my
love
first.
I love that. And I love that both of our first experiences were with women, like first outside of our bubble. Because I think that that's another thing that we don't look at. Like when we look at representation, we always think,
Hmm.
oh, just BIPOC in general or, people who are marginalized, but we forget that all women were marginalized. All women are still marginalized. Like,
Hmm.
excuse me, pardon me, sorry. I'm over here choking on coffee. Um, but like I know a lot of I know and I'm sure people are gonna give me a little pushback on this, but women in general are marginalized. Women don't equally make the same amount as men. We have to work harder. And that's why it's always so baffling to me when women pit themselves against each other, no matter what race they are, because at the end of the day, we're still beneath men, like in the workforce. And so like I think it's really important to note that yes, as BIPOC people, like in general, representation was not a thing, or even how it was represent how we were represented. But even women, like let's look at the shows, like how you and I were talking about media. Let's look at the shows in the 90s compared to now. Like how much were women sexualized in the 90s compared to now? And when I mean by sexualized, I know there's a lot of sex in things that we watch now. But what I mean by sexualized is like that was their persona, that was their character. You didn't see a lot of women who were not sexualized and had the power. You know what I mean?
That's yes. I feel like there was a show that I don't want to say the name of the show, but there was a scene in the show that made me realize that it was like, what am I watching? Like, why is this? I don't know if you ever like had that realization of just like this woman's being overly sexualized for no reason. Like this could have just been out of it. And
Yes.
no,
No,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead, because I will say something after.
I just kind of it made me go back and just realize like every movie that you saw, it wasn't like a woman doing this, it's just being over sexualized. It's like, oh, obviously these were written by men because what is happening?
That's so funny that you say that because I have had that moment, but my moment was actually more recently. So again, we're not going to name shows because I don't want any trouble. So there's a show that I watched, and I'm sure you might be able to figure out from what I'm about to say. There's a show that I watched that back in the day that I loved. Like it has like a cult following, and they had a remake, and people had a problem with the remake, for different reasons. Like the original was women, women were the main characters and they were white women. And then the remake was BIPOC women. But going back and like I watched the new one with my daughter. And I was like, hey, let's watch the original. And I was watching the original and I was like, wow, like my daughter was making comments because she grew up now. She's in now time. And she's like, wow, why are they wearing those outfits? And why is this? And then I there was a particular episode where one of the women in there was like, oh, again with these outfits because something happened and they kind of got stuck in these outfits. And it's just funny to me because like the things that happened in the original didn't happen in the updated one. And matter of fact, in the updated one, it was the exact opposite. And it was like such a massive, like, I was like, wow, that was the norm. And I was trying to explain to my daughter that that was a time, like during that time, that was normal. And she was like, that time must have sucked. Because to her, she was like, wow, that's what you guys were living through. Woo. She was like, I wouldn't have made it through your time, mommy. So like it was just like my aha moment of rewatching this now, many years later, and thinking about how that was so normal to us that we didn't even realize that something was wrong.
Right. It's just and oh my God. And then I think that like women are not having it anymore. And then that's become like a bigger issue. But when I rewatched a few movies that like you watched when you were younger, you were just like, "Oh my God, I love that movie. Let me rewatch it as an adult." And you're just like, "Oh, no. No."
Yes. But it's not you're saying no because it's bad. You're just saying no because you're like, why is this happening? And at the time, we just didn't think anything of it. I think, I hate to say it, but we kind of lived in a toxic time. But I mean, not saying that now toxic things don't happen, but we kind of lived during a toxic time because, again, there wasn't a lot of representation for BIPOC, LGBTQ women, but when there was, it was so tailored to what they wanted to put out.
Right, because I feel like especially in the 90s, early 2000s, it was especially for Black women, it was you saw there was a specific stereotype. There was the angry Black woman, the hood, like booty shaking in music videos. Like that was the only thing that was being portrayed in music videos and movies or anything. Like when we were being placed in movies, it was just this one stereotype. And it's just
Yes.
like that's
No, go ahead.
not that's not even the only, and I feel like that's why like a lot of people are like a lot of issues that I have now. Like there's so many different types of Black people, and then it's just like, really? They're like, are you sure? I'm like, okay, this.
And it's so funny because like even thinking about the one or two shows that were super popular that didn't subscribe to, those boxes, to those stereotypes, they were really popular during our time. And I feel like this generation they don't realize how important those things were because to them they see these strong Black women, they see that everyone's not an angry Black woman, and like that's not the norm, and like all of us don't act out and scream and act crazy. As a matter of fact, I would say most of the people I know don't, because just so people who, in case, let's just be real for a minute, we all have had the talk, and the talk kind of goes something like this: you can't act like that because you look like you. Like that's part of the talk. You have to be calm. You're not allowed to have emotional outbursts. You're not allowed to be angry Black woman because you look like you, right? And so like I think it's a norm now to not see that, but I think it's so crazy because the kids nowadays don't realize that the angry Black woman was the norm in media back then, you know?
Right, and I feel like living in the time of being able to see, like literally when I was expressing something that was concerning, and I was very aggressive about it because we're not passive aggressive over here. I was aggressive about it because it was important to me and it meant a lot. And then they were just like, "You're an angry Black woman." And then they come to this day and age, and it's a mixed bag. So sometimes it's like put off as angry Black woman, but when else sometimes it's mostly like you're just very passionate about this, and you're just trying to get your point across because I'm not listening. And then to have that conversation with someone that is white or a different color, and to be able to be like them to see it as more than just that stereotype, like especially coming from like the early 2000s to now, is like monumental. I think went home and like cried after that, having that conversation, because I was just like the change, just
Mhm.
experiencing the change from then to now is
I
insane.
You made me think of something that happened. I anybody who knows, I'm like a college student all the time. I love learning. And I in the past had this incident with a professor, and I turned the professor in. I made a formal complaint. I wasn't the only person who made a formal complaint. And there were quite a few of us, almost the whole class made a formal complaint, more than half of the class, because of something that was said. And we all made it. Some people did it in class, like they were on their computer making the formal complaint in class. Like it was crazy. And it was across the
Wow.
board. It wasn't just the BIPOC students who made a complaint, because it was very offensive
Mhm.
what was said and what was done. And it was kind of the first time that I saw someone outside of a Black woman defend me. And it was because I am really very calm, just because my parents always taught me to be calm, and don't give anyone a reason to say you're not calm, because when you're not calm, my mom and my dad, especially my dad, always said when you're not calm, people don't listen to you because they think you're being irrational. He was like, but when you're
Mhm.
calm, they're kind of forced to take a step back and listen. And so I'm always very calm and very professional. Well, okay, I won't say always, most of the time when something happens. And so it was really calm, and we went and spoke to the dean, and we all made this complaint. We're all in there together. And it was amazing of how quick everything got flipped. And I was labeled as, and at the time I was the only Black woman, and I was labeled as an
Mhm.
angry Black woman. And I was so floored by this. And one of the other teachers, who was happened to be Asian, an Asian male, actually defended all of us, especially me. He was like, honestly, if any of the students were angry and being crazy, it wasn't her. And then after he defended us in this situation, and then they were forced to actually look into the situation a little bit, he kind of pulled me aside and he was like, he was like, I just want you to know that even though this may not turn out in a positive way or the way that it should, he was like, I want you to know that you were heard. I heard you. And he was like, and then I just want you to remember that no matter what you do every day, no matter how calm you are, no matter how educated you are, no matter how knowledgeable you are, you have to remember that the world sees you as an angry Black woman, and that's all they're ever going to see you as, no matter how calm you are. He was like,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean that you need to change who you are, because like you handled this situation really well. And it was just so, it was kind of like the first time that I felt defended. You know what I mean? Like someone actually took my side and saw me for who I was instead of seeing me as this stereotype. But of
I
course,
love that.
hmm?
I love that.
And it's so like it's so funny because like I feel like now we defend each other a lot, but like in the 90s and the early 2000s, how often were we defended? Like in general, we didn't even defend each other because we were scared. Or when we did, we were all labeled as a certain way, because again, like I feel like this is why representation is important. This is why it's important to have people in positions that matter, and in media, where we're not just representing one outlook, one view, one type of person.
I feel like that you're right. Instead of I think that's why like for diversity, it's just that it's not just this one stereotype of people, especially people of color. Like ever like there's the stereotype is like, oh, Asians are really good at math and Black people are this that, and other, and it's like that's not true at all. Is you just saying that because that's what like you've either seen on television or someone so you like that you can't just accept that as like that's in everyone you interact with of that race. It's like no, you have to take people as they are, and I still my brain cannot fathom why we have to teach people that.
Not in 2024 anyway. I know before when we were discussing talking about this topic, you were talking about just the changes over time, and like how not having, going from a time of not having media, like social media, to having social media. Um, and I can't remember exactly what you said, but I like totally wish I would remember. But I just wanted you to talk about that because like it's what made me want to do this episode, because you were saying, talking about not having representation and how social media has changed that dynamic for us.
I I trying to remember that thought process that I had, but I do know being younger and especially just not having as much access to anything, you only see what's around you. So if you don't have, didn't have like a lot of like Black women or people of color in higher positions in companies, not seeing them, doing these things and just be basically being fed what you're just being fed information that you're told and not being able to see it in like the early 2000s and the late 90s, and then now in this day and age you can go online, you see Black women in STEM, and it's not even people who are just going into STEM now, it's they've been there, they've been doing it, but it's just like you didn't have access to it, you didn't see like, oh, so like being an adolescent today is like, oh, I can do that because you see someone doing it in that frame because it's it's sad to say, but like a lot of the things that you see is like a bunch of white people doing it. So it kind of disparages you. You're just like, oh, maybe because you're not all black people, but a lot of times you're taught like that's not for you. That's for them. Especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was a thing that was like a lot of like black millennials were taught. It's just like that's for white people, that's not for you. And then just being able to see them at black people in these positions and doing these like I've been doing this for 30 years, blah blah. And you just be like kind of expanding your horizons. It's like, oh, no, I could have done this whole time, but it wasn't, I didn't have access to this. I didn't have access to seeing these people doing these things and giving me this inspiration to seek further, you know, knowledge and wanting to do more than just what's around me, if that makes sense.
It does. And I love that because I feel like exposure is such a thing. Because I feel like exposure and representation are almost the same, right? Because if there's representation, but there's no exposure to that representation, we don't know there's representation. We don't know what's available to us. We don't know what we can do outside of the box. But but when you have that exposure and you realize, wait, this person has been doing this and people keep telling me that I can't do it, but this person's been doing it for 20 years. I'm just going to do it because and I think especially, again, let's go back to like the 90s, early 2000s. How many times were you just told or heard you can't do something just because no one else saw someone who looked like you doing it? Right.
All the time.
And then they're surprised when someone is doing it, right? Or like when we talked about earlier in how we have those few little pockets of shows and people are like, that's not real. Really? Like that's a whole thing because there are literally people doing this. What are you talking about? But the person telling you that you can't do it is also not exposed. And that's why they're telling you you can't do it because they don't have the exposure. They don't understand representation and it's not their box, it's not their experience. And it's not their experience necessarily because of I think it's just lack of exposure, and I think media, social media especially, has really opened that up for us because you can just get on social media and see people talking about what they do and seeing the amazingness of who they are.
I I think you're right in that, and it's sometimes it's projection. Like some people, especially people who've been in a specific uh, place in their life, and then they see everyone else, and then you're the one that's just like has a broader spectrum of it and want to do something else, and you see it's like, oh no, no, they're a unicorn. That's why they were able to do it. No, and then they'll project and tell you you can't do it, and in reality, they don't think they can do it, so they're gonna tell you that you can't.
Exactly. And you and I talk about this all the time about how someone can't see their self doing it. They also can't see someone else doing it. So,
Yes.
but I think that I feel like times are changing. Like I feel like my daughter is exposed to a lot more than I was exposed to. And I feel like that shapes who she is because my kid is definitely the STEM kid. I mean, I'm going to be honest, 1 and 1 is 7 over here. But my kid is the STEM kid, the science, technology, math. Sometimes she has questions and I have to phone a friend. Luckily for me, my friend is usually my dad because he is also the STEM person. But like, I have to phone a friend because I don't know how to do it. But just because I don't know how to do it or just because it's not my wheelhouse doesn't mean I want to discourage my daughter and tell her that she can't do it. It just means that that's not my thing. And so I feel like it's important for us to also realize that just because it's not something that we do doesn't mean there's not representation in someone out there who can do it. Because my daughter's perception is like she feels like she can do whatever she wants to. She's like, I don't care if there's no women in this field. I don't care if there's no BIPOC people in this field. I'm going to do it anyway. And she truly does a lot of computer and technology type of stuff. And
Mhm.
even at her age, even being, a teenager, she doesn't see a lot of people who look like her doing what she's doing. And
Mhm.
so I made it my job to find other people in those areas that she likes so that she can see representation, so she can see it. And I realized that like social media is the reason that I can find these people. Like that's my big go-to is when I want to find someone, I look on social media because I know someone has posted about it. I know someone is talking about what they do. And I really feel that if we didn't have social media, I wouldn't be able to expose her to those things.
Right. I feel like it's important to have those people in your life that even though they don't know how to do it or they know they can't do it, they don't put that on you. And then I love that, like you were saying, your daughter is like, doesn't see someone, she, to just be able to, someone to be like, oh no, you can't do that. And to laugh in their face and be like, watch me, because I can and I will and I'm going to do it. But
Yes.
to be able to, I remember my friend was getting into trading and they were really appreciative when they first told me about it because they were just like, you're the first person because they're black and they're like, you're the first person who was just like, yeah, go ahead, do it. And then when they talked to me about it later, because I had to like kind of like look up stuff online to understand the language they were using, and I was able to have a conversation with them. They're just like, you're the first one of my friends who were just one encouraged me, not only encouraged me, but actually bothered to look into it. I'm just like, you can do whatever you want to do. I I just want to be able to support you in that aspect because that's how I would want you to support me if I was doing something. And then it's not something that it's crazy, like it's not something that is like seen.
Yes. That's the
Because
big part is it's not seen.
Because when you think about it, just like you're in trading, that's for a specific type of person or this person or that person. It's just like, no, anyone could you could be one. It may take a bit, but you're putting your time and effort in it, you can do it.
Exactly. Um, I just had this thought. I was thinking about how when we were younger, um, just LGBTQ in general, like was not the norm. Now
Oh
you
my God.
watch any type of show and there's someone within the LGBTQ community within the show and it's normal. But during our time, it was not normal. Do you remember how it was like, whoa? And when it was normal, it wasn't normal. They always had some type of stereotype assigned to it, you know? And now it's just like people are starting, I don't know if it's people are starting to realize that that LGBTQ community is just normal people, or if it's just that now it's actually being shown. And it's again that representation. But I just randomly thought of that. Sorry.
I had two friends. Like I had one of my friends, he was and they're like they're both gay, and it was fine until we went to like a restaurant and they were just expressing their love for one another, and then people were, again, we're in the South, so people were looking at them weirdly. This was again early 2000s, and I questioned them, not my friends, the people who were staring. I was like, what are you looking at? I didn't say it that nicely. But it's just still crazy. Like they're just doing what everyone else who loved their person that they love or someone of an opposite sex would do. So why do they need to be stared at because you're uncomfortable in your skin? Like go somewhere else with that. But it's shocking how that was a normal thing to do, to literally look at someone like in disgust or and express that you're not okay with the fact that someone like someone of this of the same sex, because like that was publicly okay, and then now it's just like no, because it was never okay. But it's, I love how like now it's just like there's, like you said, there's more representation for it and it's normalized, which it should have been a long freaking time ago. But
Agreed.
it's that's the one thing I do like about the social media, like is you're seeing it and it's is more in shows and it's not just that the stereotypical, like you said, like gay person that was in a lot of the shows we saw when we were younger, because there was like
Yes.
only one person.
Yes, and they were always so extra. And a lot of times to me, those characters were so unrealistic. Like, and you're sitting here thinking, especially if you were exposed to that in real life, you're like, who acts like this in real life? Like it was always, I feel like all of the representation that was not, of any marginalized person, like was always so extra. It was always the extreme version. It was always the unrealistic version. It was always a narrative that they wanted to paint, and the narrative was not usually based in reality at all. And I
Are
feel
you?
like, hmm?
No, I was agreeing.
And I feel like we've come leaps and bounds like in a very short amount of time. Like for us, it doesn't really feel like a short amount of time. Like it's been years, right? But if you think like from 2000 to now, 2024, it's been 24 years. But if you really think about how far we've come in representation, we've come such a long way in a short amount of time. And I really think that it's social media. I don't think it's because the regular media is going to spin it the way they want to, but I feel like social
Mhm.
media um, like, of course, we all know social media is not all real, but there's some truth in a lot of social media, and a lot of social media people on social media are representing who they are. And I think that is what made things come so far. That is what made people, I feel like you being exposed to that makes you see things that maybe you weren't exposed to in the world in especially for people who are in their own little bubble, they don't have any outside exposure, they're only around a certain type of people. Seeing those type of people, seeing other people like that, especially if you fall into one of those marginalized categories, but you don't live in an area where you see other marginalized people thriving, I think it's really great that you're able to see that on social media because it gives you hope that you can do it because in the regular media it's still tailored. Like, do we have representation? Yes, but even like when we think about, for example, perfect example, you and I were talking about this earlier too, is like shows with Asian representation. How many shows when we were kids do you even remember someone being Asian on the show? Like it wasn't a thing. And now we have whole shows that are just Asian casts, you know?
Yes. I could think of one show and it was a cartoon when I was younger, but like an actual television show, no. And then now you look in, you see like there multiple Black and Asian representation in movies, and then and I love that, especially
And they're
because it,
positive representation, positive representation.
that's the next thing I was about to say is it's also positive representation and not any like craziness because oh my goodness, the movies in the early 2000, ugh.
Yes. Like I look back on that time and kind of cringe a little bit because it's like, oh, what was that? Why did we think that was okay?
Like the
But
traumatic movies for Black people, please stop. Okay. We
yes.
just want to be wizards and fairies and,
Yes, we also
vampires.
want to be fairies. We also want to be magical creatures. We want to be positive magical creatures that are not the bad guys.
Right?
But definitely, I think I hope that everybody in the comment, like, please share your experience and share your thoughts, especially if you're like 80s, 90s, early 2000 babies and teenagers. Like, I think that our experience is so different. Like, I feel,
Right.
I, hmm?
No, that's a great. It's so different.
Yes. And I feel like the kids nowadays are just unaware of how much they're able to speak out and how much they're able to see compared to what we had and what we were able to see. Like it was so rare for us to see us. And I mean that across the board, like marginalized across the board. It was so rare for us to see us portrayed positively. So, yeah. But I think it's about time because I know you have another appointment coming up. So,
Yes.
definitely. Thank you for joining us for the first episode of Friends in Real Life. We're definitely going to have Brittany back. We might have to have a Brittany coffee corner because Brittany and I have some conversations sometimes. So thank you again for joining us, Brittany. And please, do you want to leave us with any last words?
Um, there needs to be black vampires soon. Okay. I need it. I need it. I need
Well, black
it.
good vampires, because like, when you said that, I thought of one vampire that even though he's a bad guy, I super love him, but we need
Oh
black
my God, I
positive.
forgot about that.
Yes, yes. Oh no, two, because now I know what
Oh,
you're talking about. I wasn't talking about that one, but yes, we're just for the record for everyone, the reason that we're not saying it is because we don't want to get copyright over here and get in trouble for saying stuff we're not supposed to say, because YouTube, copyright. Nobody wants to be on YouTube grounded, but there are at least two that I can think of. One was good and one was bad. He was so bad, but he was my favorite one. So,
We need new age, okay?
yeah, yeah, new
A
age.
Black BIPOC cast of vampires and like, come on, we need it, please.
Yeah, for sure. So anybody out there listening, and if you have any influence, definitely push that agenda. And I just want to remind everybody that representation matters, and don't forget, like you don't have to go with the narrative that is being sold. You can actually do your own research and find the narrative that is reality. And so just keep that in mind. Like you can do whatever you want to do. And again, thank you for joining us, Brittany. I can't wait to have you back for another episode.
No, thank you. And you can be anything, literally.
Exactly. And thank you all for tuning in to another episode of So Are We Doing Life podcast. Stay curious, stay honest, and keep doing life your way. Until next time.